Hello everyone, welcome to Basic Concepts. Today we have a very special guest, Istvan Aranyosi, philosopher, musician, and perhaps I should say rock star
I
in
wish,
your own
I wish.
circle. I have been familiar with your books and some of your articles for a while, and especially your book about logical pantheism was very interesting for me. And you put forward a brand new version of pantheism in that book. I would like to start with a very specific claim that you make in the beginning of the book. You claim that the concept of existence is actually a relative term instead of an absolute term. What do you mean by that, and what kind of things do you think really exist in the world?
So what motivated me was
Mhm.
a long debate. It's not really a debate, but if you go to grad school, you learn about Quine, okay, on what there is, for example. And Meinongianism is a neglected topic. So Meinong's view about existence versus non-existence, subsistence, all that stuff is a bit neglected. Anglo-American philosophy likes to just say, okay, Meinong was a crazy guy, forget it. You don't even need to.
Isn't he little bit?
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's a meta philosophical option, right? So it's like, oh, do you want to be, Quine is famous for this desert landscape. So if you start with that, I like desert landscapes. I'm not gonna say what I don't need, but I'm gonna eliminate anything that looks or sounds weird. Then of course you're going to get you're going to neglect that whole tradition. And there are a few Meinongians in Western philosophy as well. There is something right in both of these views. They are like opposite views. And what is right about it is that we do have to say something about things that don't exist. Definitely, they don't exist, but they have a place in our mind, in our way of representing the range of possibilities, right? So,
Including impossible objects, right?
yeah, exactly. So including impossible objects, whatever you can think of, and remember that thinking is a lot easier than imagining, for example. So you cannot imagine a round, sorry,
Yeah, and we can talk about this, and it has a function in our
round square, right?
philosophical
Exactly,
discourse.
right? But I mean, Meinong had these ideas like, from something being a round square, you could deduce that it is round, right? But that's not the same as a proposition or as a sentential contradiction. So something is a square, and it is not the case that something is a square. This is unacceptable. This is like sentential contradiction. But something is square and round, if you think about it, I mean, why is this impossible? Well, because of the meaning of the predicates. Is it a priori? Is it a posteriori? Right? I mean, you can develop it this way. Like, is it because we can't imagine this, or because if it's only that, then it's not a big deal, right? Now, I'm not going this way or that way. I'm just saying that, well, why not have something that would accommodate both these views as conflicting views?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is a very important thing, because what I missed in metaphysics and Quinean approach especially is that, of course, there's this idea of universe of discourse, and the existential quantifier ranges over everything that's in the universe of discourse, and then you have existence is absolute and so on. But then I thought, okay, what about someone who says, I don't agree with Quine's theory? Okay, isn't that also a part of logical space, right? So isn't that also, a world in which Quine's view is not true, okay? And for that, I need
think
something
similar
bigger.
objections apply to Ludwig Wittgenstein's view as well, which indicates that, if I refer to his own quotation, my language is the boundary of my world. What about thinking about that language? Then if we step outside that world, is that a legitimate move? The same
Yeah, I
objection.
agree. So I agree, except that, I mean, if you take it seriously, take it literally, like the language, I kind of agree that the language is my world, because I think the problem with Wittgenstein would be that he wasn't tolerant enough about, or liberal enough about, how far the language can go, right? Because part of my thesis is that, language allows you to represent, conflicting views even about ontology, right? And so where are you going to represent those conflicting views? I mean, if I have a Quinean ontology, right, then I cannot represent a non-Quinean ontology in a language, because that's going to be totalitarian, as it was. Like, that's all, right? So I agree with Wittgenstein that the language is your world, or the boundaries of language are the boundaries of your world. But I think, you shouldn't reduce language to nice, because possible worlds are like nice, consistent entities, and there's a lot of ugliness out there.
Mhm.
And I think my view was that, you have to accommodate these as well. There's one exception, and that's a big mistake that I make in the book, which there's a topic that I neglected. And in one of the book reviews in the Notre Dame philosophical reviews was pointed out, which I totally agree with, which is paradoxes such as,
Mhm.
the liar paradox. And
Yeah, a person who says I'm lying.
yeah,
That's
so this
usually
sentence
liar.
is false. I do not talk about these, and it's very important because they are anomalies of logical space, of any way of trying to describe logical space.
Mhm.
And so they are like, I like to think of the liar, for example, really as a kind of cycle, an infinite cycle.
Mhm.
Like you cannot assign I don't like to think about it as a contradiction, because if it's a contradiction, it's a logical space in my conception of logical space. But I think about them as your inability to assign consistently assign truth values to this sentence, which is going to move infinitely in a cycle. This is true if and only if it is false, if and only if it is true, if and also.
And
So
not
it's an
necessarily a
anomaly.
vicious cycle, could
I
we
mean,
say?
yeah, it
Mhm.
looks vicious, but
Uh-huh.
there were people, try to give some kind of larger theory of truth that would account for this phenomena, and they would actually make sense.
Mhm.
Revision theory of truth and so on.
Sir, what kind of a divine concept does your view put forward? What do you mean by the God of logical space in your book?
There were many pantheist philosophers, right? And it seemed weird to me that to reduce God to nature or the universe, even, okay.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
mean, God is the greatest conceivable being, the maximally good, maximally knowledgeable, whatever. That doesn't seem to fit very well with the idea of God as the universe or nature or the world or something like that. There were some exceptions. So there were some mystic philosophers or theologians, let's say, who were talking about rather than God existing, saying things like God is beyond existence and non-existence, right? God is the support of everything that exists and doesn't exist. So that sounds very much like God is the ground, such as logical space. And
Do
of
you
course,
think God is transcendent to logical rules, those logical spaces? When you say it is the God of logical space, are we talking about something over logical domains, let's say?
no,
For example, can God change the mathematical truths?
no, I don't think so.
Definitely not.
Although that was orthodoxy all the way until, I guess, 18th century or something. No, I don't go that far. I'm just saying that, if there is any good candidate, so basically the starting point is the ontological argument, which we learn in school, it's like, oh, it doesn't work. Okay. You can't get ontology out of language just simply. So at most you get that by definition God must exist, but it doesn't follow that God exists actually, or God exists, but only that if God existed, part of his definition would be its existence. But so I was I was very convinced of these replies to the ontological argument. But then I thought further, and I thought that okay, wouldn't there be something that deserves the name God in the sense that an ontological argument would actually work?
Yeah.
If you use that as a God. So it's not a theistic God, because with a theistic God, it's very simple. For me, it's like, okay, I can conceive of a world, of a godless world, right?
Yeah.
So I can even say, okay, there's a God in this world, but guess what? I can conceive of a world in which there is a stone and nothing else.
Sure.
Whatever, right? And I think this is very intuitive. Now that already goes against the necessity of God, right? Because that's a godless world. God should be everywhere in logical space.
Yes.
And then I thought, what is the entity? What could there possibly be as a constructed entity that would survive all these conceivability intuitions, right? And that would be a logical space that would be closed under negation, for example. So even for any proposition P, its negation would still be in logical space. So I call this logical totalitarianism.
Logical totalitarianism.
But
Yeah,
the
I
idea
remember
is that, the idea is that, modulo paradoxes. I totally admit that I should have talked about paradoxes as well. And I'm talking.
Is this your biggest regrets throughout your career?
No.
Like Einstein's cosmological constant?
No, I just remember what my regret is that I did have it because I wrote this book during the summer here in Turkey, in Kuşadası.
Yeah.
And I totally had it in my mind, like it was like the liar, and possibly other paradoxes. I should
and then
talk
you
about.
Totally
I totally forgot about them because I was so absorbed by writing about the God stuff and the philosophy of mind things. And if you can talk about it, it's there in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
somehow
go back to Quine, on what there is, and compare with Timothy Williamson's argument for necessary existence, right? So Quine would kind of tell you like, okay, it's a fake paradox to say that Plato doesn't exist implies that Plato must exist because you are talking about Plato, right?
Sure.
No, because in real logical notation, first order logic, it is basically negating the quantifier. That's one thing. And then, Williamson comes and says, okay, what about the proposition that Timothy Williamson doesn't exist? The proposition exists. And then if you think that propositions contain some kind of entity, when they talk about that entity, then that entity must exist. Now think, Timothy Williamson exists in this world, but doesn't exist in another world. Another way of saying Timothy Williamson is contingent, right? But since I found a place for, even in the non-existence of Timothy Williamson, I am committed to their
some kind of an imaginary
being, but I don't want to say being. So in my book, I say standing. So I call this the standing.
Right.
There stands something because I can think of it or think about it. Right. So Williamson argues that that leads to necessary existence. I think there's a bit of cheating there, so I don't agree with him that's necessary.
Yeah.
I think my recipe is to relativize existence. So I say that, well, if you don't relativize standing, then it's a necessarily standing entity, like any contingent being. But of course, we don't want to give up on the idea of contingency. I don't want to say that I'm a necessary being. Come on, right? So I do want to say that I exist in some worlds like this one, and I don't exist in some others. So I want both. I want both the idea that in some way I'm necessary because I am there, written, by God on the big map or the big drawing board. But I also want to say that I don't exist everywhere, which is contingency, right?
Yeah. In this scheme, can we say that God is the most real being so? And do you think he has mental states?
Yeah, so first
is
question,
he a personal God?
with
that respect?
The first question, to reply the first question, well, yes. So because some people pushed me, I gave several talks on this, and they pushed me on the idea of, so therefore, logical space exists as such. And I have to say yes. So it's the only entity that has absolute existence, right? Because it's the ground of every other claim of existence of any other entity, right? Another interesting, or maybe, maybe not interesting, but funny, let's say, claim is that coexistence is basic, not existence, right? So I claim in the book that coexistence is the real basic relation. And existence
more fundamental than existence?
Yeah, so basically you need at least two things that coexist, basically being in some relation somewhere. It's not a personal God. I mean, that's the problem, because some people have the problem of you shouldn't call it God, right? So there's a bit of, all pantheists have that problem. So no less in this one, it won't be a personal God. It won't be what you will lack is a unity, which is the unity of a person acting, thinking, desiring, believing, things like that, right? So,
and is he a moral God, do you think? Putting aside the personality issue over there, is there any moral code embedded in this system?
This also came up. So I have a kind of, that was exactly an objection. So it was like, you should, this entity doesn't deserve to be called God because you will get both maximal morality there and maximal immorality there. So someone's Ilhan Inan, I think he said, is the God of garbage. Like all the garbage is there.
Wasn't it also the case for Spinoza's God? Good and evil are kind of illusions when you ascend to the divine perspective. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's different. It's different in the sense that, so one thing that you are guaranteed to have, because you have everything. So it's a kind of obsession with this idea of everything. Of course, we can't really talk about absolute everything, but this would be the closest you can get to that, right? So obviously it would include maximal moral goodness in it. Mm-hmm. But of course it would include maximal immorality as well.
Yeah.
And my reply to that was that, you can't do it in any other way. You have to take the garbage if you want to have the best thing as well. And that's not up to us. It's like, it is...
related with this issue. Let's say there is some kind of eternal recurrence and infinite number of universes. In such a world, in such a scenario, we would have infinite amount of evil, infinite amount of good, if they mean anything, let's say. And according to your personal view, would that be a kind of scenario that is closer to hell or heaven?
This is exactly the topic that would distinguish this view from any theistic view, right? So obviously it's not a theistic view, because it is going to, in a way, it's telling you that, everything is there.
Do you think there is some kind of eternal recurrence according to your logical pantheistic perspective?
Now we have complicated and maybe even layers of meta layers of this, which is like, for example, philosophical views about the universe or God and so on, right? So if you want to accommodate all of them in the sense that you want to find a place for them to be represented somewhere, right? That's going to be my kind of logical sense.
Yeah.
So including eternal recurrence would be like, yeah, definitely there will be a view against that. It will say that there's no eternal recurrence. Both of them are going to be there, right? So there's no commitment. In some sense, it's a very empty doctrine, because if you say everything is there, we shouldn't debate about
we cannot
everything.
really step outside and say something about the totality of your
so that's the idea of totalitarianism, is that there's no way, there's no outside. So Meinong had a similar idea. Outer existence, I guess, would be translated, but Außersein, I guess, is the closest to my way of thinking about logical space. It's like anything that can be represented, regardless of whether it's consistent or not. That's going to be the largest universe of objects, because his theory is called the object theory, right? An object for him is anything that you can think about. Round square, you can think about it, it's there. You cannot imagine it, but who cares? Imagination is a stupid psychological state, right? You can put together the predicate square and round and you say, okay, the thing that is square
somehow
round,
we
right?
can do that.
So it's not like sentential contradiction. I wouldn't have sentential contradictions in this. I do have contradictory objects, but not contradictory sentences. If you think about the inferential relations, what you can deduce from such things, what you get in classical logic from a contradiction, sentential contradiction, you can deduce anything. Now that's trivial, right? And that's why we don't like it. That's why people try to revise classical logic. They say, that's stupid. Like, how can you deduce anything from this contradiction? But with the round square, it's not true that you can deduce anything. You can deduce only two things. Something is round and that something is square, which is like, okay, the round square is very different from the P and not P kind of thing, right? I want to be able to represent multiverse theory and the universe theory, as two conflicting views, both of them having a place in logical space. Although some multiverse people might say that that's all there is. But I'm saying, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Perhaps.
Because the other guys say, no, I have a different view. And I want to be able to represent both views, right?
Shall we dive into philosophy of mind a little bit? I have a very critical question concerning the hard problem of consciousness. What is your position on it? Do you think it's a kind of a redundant problem? Can it be solved?
Yeah, well, I change my mind every once in a while. So,
really?
Because
according to one of those articles that you have written before, you were kind of an identity theorist at that time.
I still believe in that article, but I'm teaching this philosophy of mind every year since many years. I'm not like Dennett or, people who try to, or David Lewis, 95 has a famous paper, What Experience Teaches. A very, very funny paper. Sometimes I read that paper just to laugh about how much he tries to eliminate, get rid of this problem. You cannot, it's very hard to get rid of it. So just like yesterday, I taught analytic functionalism. And there's this famous paper by David Lewis, Matt Payne and Marshall Payne, 1980. And he's at great pains at trying to tell you how you identify mental states across subjects and maybe even across worlds and so on. And when the solution is so simple, experience. Okay.
Yes.
But he doesn't want, he wants to avoid experience because there's the bad guy. I mean, that's the thing that is problematic. So I do agree there's a hard problem of consciousness. Experience is very weird. It is not, definitely it's not mechanistically describable. It's simple, in terms of mere syntax. Even you don't even have to go to semantics. So I do admit that there is a hard problem, and experience is something that is the basis of everything, because all observations in science are based on experience.
Yes.
But if you want to explain experience itself, there is a gap. I agree. Now, I have that argument 2011, which is a kind of probabilistic/inductive kind of argument, where I guess what I try to argue for is that it's more reasonable to believe in identity. In some sense, it's old school. In some sense, it's, like the old identity theory. You have two incompatible claims. One claim is that this world is normal, which is that there is mind-brain correlation. I like to tell my students, that we are so lucky. They think I'm joking, but I'm not joking. We are so lucky that this world has laws of nature, right? So if I feel thirsty and I believe that there is water in my fridge,
yes,
I go and open my fridge. And this is what I do. I open the fridge. This is super lucky.
Yes.
Because I can imagine infinitely many worlds in which I'm thirsty. I believe there is water in my fridge, and this doesn't happen.
Yes.
Or it's random. It might happen or not happen, right? It's a conflict between this belief that this is a normal world. We have the correlations, it's lawful and everything.
It is virtually a miracle that we are not living in
exactly. So it would be a miracle.
World,
if it was not everywhere like that, it would be a super miracle that here we happen to be in this lucky. It would be so
Can't we
lucky.
say that there is basically a psychophysical law that connects the two? Although the two phenomena, I mean the matter and mind, are perfectly different. And let's say God just made it so. God just made it so that they are lawfully connected to each other. So, but still
now
distinct.
that you tell me, you could develop an argument for existence of God. The only alternative is that so I think either
just
you
to
say
simplify
that,
things.
Either you say that, if you don't want us to be super lucky, like, implausibly lucky, you'd rather believe that this mind-brain correlation is everywhere in logical space, which would mean that it's necessary, which is physical.
Well, actually, right? That's a very good point.
Or alternatively, God chose us, and God is nice, and God wanted us to have, some kind of occasionalism like that, in which whenever I want water, my body obeys the right way and so on. So I think, that might be, because that would kind of, but then, you introduce God, which is, even more scientifically speaking, even less empirically justified.
If we try to say they are naturally correlated, without any prior logical design or metaphysical design, let's say, then we fall into a problem of luck between the two.
That's the point. So basically, it's very simple that if zombies are conceivable, of course, then anything is conceivable in terms of violations of these laws. So there could be a partial zombie that I'm a zombie for 2 seconds. I'm a zombie for 10 seconds. I'm a zombie in my visual but not auditory, all these kind of things. Now, of course, one objection, David Chalmers had an objection in private communication against this, which I understand the objection. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, but his objection was that, this is what we do anyway. We do induction, we do, we do probabilistic, we do scientific kind of hypotheses. And so because part of the argument is basically that, obviously I cannot observe your mind, right? So to assume that you are correlated the right way.
Yes.
I have to, you know.
If there are emergence laws
There will
in
be
this case, that would be kind of marvelous
Yeah,
in this case. And,
well, I guess
what
my
would be
point
the
is that
explanation
there's
of
a
that?
trade-off. There's a trade-off because I mean, imagine this one of these worlds, imagine, you know, conceive of a world that's a zombie world for only 10 milliseconds. Okay, we wouldn't even be aware. Okay, or let's say, you know, 1 second. Let's so that we would be aware from the outside. Right?
What if I say it is just a brute fact, a brute correlation?
I mean,
Would that be legitimate?
Yeah, I mean, let's see.
Let's not appeal to any god or intelligent design about this, but
okay. I mean,
it sounds very strange to me, to be honest. What kind of a brute correlation is that? Between multiple layers, for example, mental states and physical states.
I am this old school guy saying that, you know, no necessity without identity. But I mean, my former supervisor, Howard Robinson, would say like, no, it's perfectly okay, perfectly possible to have necessary correlations without identity. But then my reply is to say that, you know, wasn't that the whole reason we were debating zombies and so on? It was all about conceivability, possibility. So now if you move the goalpost and say that, but there you could be a dualist, but with necessary connections, right? Say, you know, give me a break, you know. I mean, we've been debating. I'm not saying it's not, I can, you know, but it's a Humean principle. Like, I mean, why would there be? So I agree with Chalmers when he says, you know, if there's a necessity, you have to be able to explain it inside. There must be something deeper than, so it shouldn't be brute. I think the argument works. My argument with, you know, I look at you. You could be just a normal person, you know, or you could be the infinitely many zombie versions.
Yes.
That you were a zombie for a second. You were a zombie in auditory but not visual. All those things. And I think one objection that kind of works is to say that, this would lead to blanket skepticism about any kind of probabilistic, scientific, inductive reasoning. But I don't think it works precisely because of the hard problem. Because I can appeal to this reasoning precisely because the mind is weird. It's the first person, subjective, inaccessible by others, you know, versus the objective. So we do science usually on, you know, third person observable.
Yes.
And then, you know, of course, induction works because there's no problem like this. So in a way, I'm saying I'm turning the tables on the dualist and saying like, precisely because the mind is so weird, there is a hard problem. That's why you should be physicalist.
Exactly. Shall we briefly get political, but softly political, and then end our interview?
Sure.
What do you think is wrong with globalism and woke movement today?
I was one thing that surprised me, like people oppose two views, which is globalism and nationalism, right? And I'm not a nationalist. Since a young age, I was never a nationalist, and even today, I'm not a nationalist, right? But I think it's a fake opposition. So I would call myself a localist, which is basically just taking democracy seriously, right? I know there is a confusion, there is a kind of danger of, especially nowadays, of confusing someone saying, I want more democracy with someone being a populist.
Yes.
But, you know, most of the populist rhetoric that's happening now is very nationalistic, and I'm not nationalist. What I'm saying is like localist, right? So I want, and it's a very old idea, you know, old classical liberal. So I would call myself classical liberal, right? Old classical liberal idea, you know, no taxation without representation. That's a famous, you know, right?
Yeah.
So basically, no political decision without involving me and asking my opinion, and also the opinion of, you know, certain interest groups that represent certain larger groups in society and so on.
No Harari says nation states are like self-contained fortresses. This is his analogy. And it is unlikely that there will be a perpetual peace as long as we have these fortresses, as long as the world's order is based upon these self-contained fortresses. You know, how can we deal with the global scale problems and so on? You know, what would be your comment about this issue, and what would be the alternative? Can we still appeal to some kind of classical liberalism and abide by this, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't agree with him. I mean, I don't think the nation state
Uh-huh.
is, the bad guy here. If you look at all the wars, the modern wars, and not even modern, like even the older wars, like they are all global wars actually. So there's proxy wars
Yes.
going on everywhere. There's Cold War was a proxy. Cold War was two main poles, and
Yes.
the entire world
Launching proxy
you
wars
know,
in certain places of the
yeah,
world,
and
like
then
Vietnam,
the whole world was.
obviously.
It was never no important war, I guess, was really by itself between nations. And I think even in older times, it was always like empires trying to extend, bothering other empires who didn't like that they are extending. So I don't think the nation state is a weird stuff for sure. I don't like the nation state, to tell you frankly, but it's
Exactly.
it appeared 19th century, and it gave people a certain identity now that many people think it's constructed, and so on, which is like okay. To say that it's constructed, it doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important, right? Just like I'm not religious. I don't believe in almost any claim that any religion makes, right? But I totally understand that it's very important and it moves people, and it's because people's beliefs that they act in a certain way. Not even them, but governments as well, right? So if something is represented as real, then it is real in its consequences. It's a beautiful and deep theorem, right? Thomas and Thomas couple. Which is exactly this idea. Like, it doesn't matter whether something is truthful, does it represent reality?
Yeah.
What matters is that if some situation is defined as real in people's minds, the behavior will look
It reminds
as
me
if it's
of
real.
this.
I'm not sure what my attitude is towards all this stuff, but if I want to summarize it, in a way, I feel helpless. Not me, but anyone who's like a normal, ordinary citizen. And this might bring you to the idea of populism, because populism works on this idea that the elites are running the world and you are helpless, but I'm gonna save you. But in some other way, I think that we do have the power. It's just we don't really try. Okay. And democracy is a beautiful idea. The idea of asking people.
An
And
idea
this is what
in decline.
Climate change. This is basically because of climate change, we need to do all sorts of stuff that reduces people's well-being like crazy, right? But no one asks the people. Of course, they ask the experts. We know from sociology of science that science is a very corrupt business. And people try to say that science is this angel who is purely epistemic, and no.
Yeah.
Science is money. Science is interests, and so on.
Funding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, ask the people and never neglect, those who are actually, who suffer because of this, right? You shut up because the experts say that. No, you have to ask me, am I ready to give up my car, and I'm not ready. I'm sorry. If you are that smart, if you are that expert and smart, invent something that would not make my life worse.
Otherwise, it is technocracy, not democracy.
So otherwise, I do believe I'm a humanist. So I think people are the most important thing, not nature, not animals, not whatever. It's people, okay? And governments should work
This
for
is
people.
an unpopular opinion.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, you're welcome.
Hope to see you next
Thanks for
time.
inviting me. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. See you next time, guys. Take care.